Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the HR Cartel podcast. I'm your host, Tim Dive. Thank you for joining me once more. If this is your first time listening to this podcast, one of your first episodes, thank you for listening, tuning in. You're the reason why we reach more people. So we ask just one favor, and that is click like, follow, subscribe, whatever it is on the podcast platform you're listening to it on. Just give it a follow. If you think someone that you know will get some benefit from listening, please share it. What we want to do here is help small and medium-sized companies keep up with legislation changes, not just keep up, actually get ahead, foresee what's coming. We'll talk a bit about that today, about foreseeing what's coming, because the things that we said a couple of years ago are now starting to come in real life, come to fruition. And they're not great things, but if you know what's coming in the business world in terms of IR, what that means in terms of an impact on your business, you can better prepare, you'll survive, and that sort of thing. So if you know someone running a business, a small, medium-sized company, and that's really anyone from 0 to 200 employees, anywhere, big field, right? Big field there, but anyone in that world, we can certainly help, and this message is for them. So that's all we ask. Thank you. If you've already done that, we appreciate that. We see you following us. We see you sharing us. Very much appreciated. Right. Last episode was a bit of a weird time one. The title of it was about conspiracies and it was about the government's colluding and the courts colluding, this sort of stuff in terms of workplace relations in Australia. And I went down a bit of a pathway where we spoke about rules in workplaces affecting their ability to say certain things, do certain things, have certain opinions, express certain things. And then the Charlie Kirk thing happened. And the wrong thing to do, I think, right now is for me to talk about all that again in light of what's occurred. It's a disgusting act that's happened. It's not acceptable. But it is in America. But make no mistake, Australia is following that path in terms of the suppression of speech. I'm not going to use this terrible act to try and make a point. I'm not going to do that. The point I wanted to make was that podcast was the day before that happened. Maybe in the future we will revisit this again, but there are other cases in Australia that we've spoken about before, such as an unfair dismissal that was successful because a person was terminated because they didn't want to participate in a welcome to country ceremony. He was working for a council, just for a run-of-the-mill council meeting, and it was always done. For example, that person was terminated and kicked out of the company. They lost their employment. They had the courage to fight it, and they got reinstated. Now, that's nowhere near as extreme as what's happened overseas and recently, but this is happening here. And that's about all I'm going to say on that for the moment. I think we need to just let things settle with anything to do with that kind of rhetoric or those types of issues. So we will revisit that. I just wanted to make the point that podcast episode, the title of it, conspiracies and collusion, all sort of stuff. I'm not going to change it. It was done before that event happened, that incident occurred. But I'm not going to keep on banging on about it and use that horrible act, to try and get people to listen to this podcast. I'll move on from that now. The things I want to talk about here today is a few cases. Actually, there's one very funny one, and I hope you laugh along with me. Albanese's suffering his own medicine here, and I couldn't be happier. Him and his team are starting to feel the pressure that small businesses feel due to his decisions. Ill-informed decisions, union-driven decisions, union wish lists made, ticked off, and decisions made 3 years ago, and even earlier than that, some of which have influenced some commission decisions on awards, which are now biting him in the ass. And I'm happy to see that he's finally seeing some of the outfall from his own decisions, his party's decisions, but also some other things. General protections claims, salaries, how we're going to treat them. And some unfortunate news coming out of the mining industry, which we all knew was happening, which was the mining industry is suffering, and what that means for small businesses moving on. So these are going to be very interesting topics to talk about, four or five different things we'll talk about, which all relate to trying to look ahead and foresee what's coming, using what we know and the impact of what we know to try and better prepare ourselves in small and medium-sized businesses moving forward. So this will be a good one. The first thing, let's talk about this Albanese thing. So it's just an article that's come out today. I think it might be in the Australian. I'm not too sure, but there's modern award reviews happen in the commission, and it's supposed to happen 4 yearly. There seems to be no rhyme or reason to these reviews that the commission's doing. There's part-time reviews that are part of the 4-year modern award review, which we actually made a submission to the commission for in their assessment. There's going to be a hearing probably late next year with regard to part-time provisions as part of that review, right? So the point I'm making is these reviews just continually happen. One of those reviews was the pay equity element of those award reviews. And what the commission did was they made some gender-based decisions. And those gender-based decisions targeted a few modern awards, and they said, well, we're increasing the rates payable in these awards and these classifications and so on by X amount, right? Some of these increases went up by about 60%, huge increases, okay? So let's not debate the reason for them. Whenever I say gender-based, it's triggering. It triggers me even. I hate that there's gender-driven decisions in employment law. It's black and white stuff. There's reasons in history for why the commission have opted to go and make these decisions and changes. That's for a different podcast episode, right? The fact is, the government of the day requests and requires the Fair Work Commission to act in accordance with how it determines that commission should act, and pay equity, gender-driven pay equity was one of those things, right? So the commission's gone ahead and done it. Now, what this means is that the commission has identified a modern award, probably the SHADS award, which is a disastrous award in the first place, and said, right there, that award right there, we're increasing it. Now, the NDIS scheme is now going to suffer an enormous increase in headcount cost because of that decision. So Albanese is now scrambling and saying, whoa, hang on, let's just put this decision off a bit. Let's just wait. Let's just make it, it's not come into power or come into play until 6 months after the final decision. Let's give ourselves some breathing space here. I find that hilarious, not surprising, but hilarious. And I'm happy that he is finally starting to see, he and his party is finally starting to feel a bit of financial pressure. Financial pressure is only one element of the changes that this government has brought about. The management burden, the administration burden, trying to understand the industrial relations changes, hundreds of changes, right? Trying to manage psychosocial, trying to manage gender-based harassment and sexual discrimination, all this sort of stuff, right? But this financial element is but one element, and he is finally starting to see it. So I find that interesting. That when it suits the government, when it suits them, they'll opt out of legislation. For example, the gender pay reporting. One of the biggest employers in the whole country is the government, right? Now, they're imposing rules and have done now for a few years that anyone with more than 100 employees must do gender pay reporting. Stitched up reporting if I've ever seen it. The Workplace Gender Equality Agency is a horrible agency that does nothing and achieves nothing, right? Now, you can challenge my opinion on that. You're welcome to. Change my mind on that. I'm all ears. But they've been around for a very long time and achieved a big donut. The only thing they've achieved is getting companies to do this report. This report is full of flawed data. It provides no information on wage gaps and this sort of thing. In fact, it proves there isn't one. And if there is one, it's a very, very small, tiny margin when you consider like-for-like positions. In fact, there is a counter report, and I'm happy to put a link to that report in these notes if I can find it. But it's a global report on genuine wage gap data that goes down to the specifics, the job type, the workplace, the position, this sort of stuff. Surprise, surprise, no pay gap, right? So in any case, when it suits the government, they will rule themselves out of legislation requiring them to make those reports. No, they don't have to. The biggest impact, if there is any pay gap at all, would be via the government as the largest employer, right? Wouldn't you think? But no, they're exempt from that, and these rules only apply to you in the public sector. The political class are exempt. Well, here in this situation, they can't opt out of it. The NDIS scheme is largely staffed in the private sector, or it is staffed in the private sector. There's a small government department, I guess, who runs it, but the cost of that sector is private enterprise. This decision impacts private companies in the National Employment Relations System, and now the government that decision is costing them probably billions more dollars. I don't know how much really. That's a stab in the dark. Hundreds of millions at least, I would assume. So yeah, hopefully there's some lessons learned here from the government that a decision you make will absolutely bankrupt and close doors of companies. Yeah, this government's very lucky they can reach into our pockets and pay the bills. Small businesses don't have that option. I don't have that option. I've got no options to do that. I have to go and present myself to a competitive market, convince people to work with us as we're better than other options out there, and try and develop and perform and get new clients and train my staff. And if I can't do all that perfectly, we can't make money. We can't pay bills. And these bills are being driven by government decisions. So, let's close that one off there. But I think that's a good one to look at and highlight that. Hopefully, this will send some feedback back to the government that productivity claims of focusing on productivity are just false, unachievable. When the other decisions you make as a government and your commissions and tribunals are making in under government direction drive the cost of operating up so high that it's almost impossible to survive in the market. Let's move on, shall we? Let's get on. Look, we've spoken about this Coles and Woolworths case recently, and I want to talk about salaries because this is going to impact small businesses the most. 100% it will. When I say the most, I don't mean the most financially, because let's face it, it's the cost of this decision in the court it's about $1 billion to these grocery these big grocery corporates. That's not good at all, right? Who's going to pay for that? I'm sure it's going to be us at the checkout. But the biggest, the most detrimental impact is small business, because this has the ability to close the doors of your small business, right? There's two things in this decision that we really need to hit home and hit home hard on. And that is that annualized salaries, as long as this decision stands, it's not challenged and there's no higher court ruling overturning it and changing the rule. As long as this stands, this decision means that your annual salaries in your small business or any business, if your people are covered by modern awards, which is almost everybody, they're not fixed. They are not fixed, right? Now, what do I mean by that? Well, we look at, okay, well, if I hire this person, that person on these salaries, my headcount costs for the next 12 months at least, or 2 years or 3 years, I can trust that it's going to be that much. Well, you can't trust that anymore. You just can't do it. That's because what this really means is, traditionally, for decades, for as long as annualized salaries have been around, and in fact, even annualized salaries inside modern awards say that we can do this. We can do one reconciliation in 1 year, not every fortnight or week or month, whatever the pay cycle is, right? But what this ruling says is that we can't use a pay cycle. Say you're a fortnightly pay cycle. Your people are on $100,000 annual salary. Well, last fortnight, they just did 38 hours each fortnight, right? $100,000 for 38 hours. I mean, you're probably almost triple a modern award rate. That's closed off the last pay cycle. This new pay cycle, they did 2 hours of overtime. Right? 2 hours of overtime, or 2 hours above what your pay rate covers them for. Well, you have to now pay extra in that fortnight. You have to pay them more money than their annual salary, because you can't use, the double award payment you made last week to offset an hour of overtime or 2 hours of overtime or 2 hours of pay that you fall short of this week or this fortnight. That's what this means. Okay, that is not how we've become to know how annual salaries work. It is also not even how a lot of modern awards are written. Nonetheless, the law means the decision is this: one pay cycle is the only window that you're allowed to use offsets for. That's what the rule is. So that means that your headcount cost with annualized salaries, it's not fixed at all. It's not fixed at all. There's 2 points I want to make here. The first point is this. What's the point in annualized salaries anymore? Okay, we use them to simplify and to standardize and to make things a bit more simple to understand, rather than having to go through line after line after line, thousands and thousands of words just to figure out what to pay someone. And I'll give you an example, right? I think it's the Hospitality Award. I read 3 or 4 awards for a talk I was doing not long ago, Hospitality, Fast Food and Restaurant Industry Awards. And I think it's a Hospitality Award where I had to read almost 5,000 words just to figure out what time I could start someone and finish someone without having to pay penalty rates. And that comes down to rostering and all sorts of rules, right? Almost 5,000 words I had to read. And we expect small businesses to do that? No. So of course they opt for annual salaries when they get the chance to. Of course they do. And even those awards, they let you average. They let you average over a month or even longer. You know, the Clerks Award lets you average over 12 months, a whole year. But this court says simultaneously to that written rule in awards, simultaneously the court saying, no, it's only a pay cycle. So I expect this to be challenged, right? But that's the first point. Why would we even now be able to trust annualized salaries? Annualized salaries may even cost us way too much and force us to make redundancies or close the doors down. So this has the ability to eat away any reason why a company would want to give an annual salary to someone. Meaning what? Well, that means, in my view, people's earnings drop down. Companies will just go, no, you're a per hour employee, whether you're full-time, part-time, casual, it doesn't really matter. You're paid per hour. And we're going to pay you as per the award. If we want to give bonuses, we'll give you some bonuses, right? That's going to have a detrimental effect on people's lives because, you know, it's too risky to risk the business. Don't forget, small business owners have their houses mortgaged to keep those doors open, to keep those people employed and the bills paid. Let's not forget that, right? You expect these small business owners to risk their family home, the roof that's over their children's heads, just to comply with an award? That's unreasonable. This system's unreasonable. This court ruling is unreasonable, right? I hope it gets challenged. I hope it goes to the higher court and they see some common sense and they actually look at how things work in practice and what this decision might mean for small businesses, who, by the way, are the largest employing entities in the private sector as a group in Australia, right? So it can be detrimental. The second thing about this is there is now no longer any justifiable reason that a company thinks they don't have to record time in their business. Why? Well, because if you get a challenge and you can't prove that you paid someone enough according to the time they worked in that pay cycle, that is now, it's an underpayment, right? Potentially wage theft, a criminal charge. That criminal charge comes with major penalties. Number one, the individual who intentionally made that arrangement, $1.56 million, I think is the fine, about $1.5 million, a bit over for you personally. For the company, for your business, it's about 7.8 or 7.6 million, something like that. Let's round it up to $8 million for the company. Or the court can decide it's that or 3 times the underpayment amount. Now, that's not such a big deal for smaller companies because they'll just give you the fine because what they want to do here is a larger company. They want the ability to be able to penalize you 3 times the underpayment because it will be bigger than the penalties that the court's allowed to impose, such as the 1.56 million or the up to $8 million fine, right? So it's nasty legislation. It's vicious legislation. They're looking to do damage, looking to shut companies down, right? That's what they're doing. They want the ability to fine your company more than $8 million. Well, $8 million isn't enough. Nasty, nasty legislation. Now, the only way you can avoid any of this and prove that you haven't done anything wrong is with time recordings. There's no other way you can do it. So you need to now record time. The only time you're not going to have an issue with an underpayment claim is if you've got a non-award employee. Now, these people are normally, quite senior managers, HR, accountants, lawyers. They're normally higher paid people, higher than awarded rates anyway, right? So there are no loadings, there are no overtimes, there are no penalties, and all that sort of stuff. So it's not difficult to try and defend a claim like that. You would just say, "Well, show us the hours you worked." If you couldn't show the time recordings, you go to email records and you look at email activity in the system, their logs and their details on technology and the hours that they could have worked. More often than not, it's going to be impossible for them to work any more hours than they could have physically worked. Because their salaries are too high and their only required entitlement is the minimum wage, right? So it's going to be hard in those circumstances for them to win that claim against you. But all other circumstances, there's absolutely no more any justifiable reasons why you shouldn't be recording time. If you're not recording time yet, this is a significant administrative burden that you now have to take on. There's no question about that. I agree with you. I think it's bullshit just as much as you probably do, right? But you have to do it. Now, we work with clients and we introduce technology into their business to manage HR as a plug-in HR team, right? Us experienced experts managing HR for your business as an experienced HR team plugged in, and we incorporate technology that does all this on an automated basis for you. Your employees open an app and they just go bang, 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 and it's done, right? There are easy ways to do this. If you want to talk about that, then reach out. But there's the two things, right? The two things are that it's detrimental to small business. Your salaries are no longer going to be fixed. You may be paying $110,000. You may be paying $150,000 a year for someone. Doesn't mean that's all you're going to pay them. You may now have to pay them even more than that, and that's unknown. And that's the first thing. And the second thing is the time recording. So make sure you're across all that. One more on that before I move on. Don't just think this is from now on, right? An underpayment claim can come to you 6 years later. If you don't have records to prove the time that was worked for 6 years prior to today, you can't defend yourself. Now, this isn't an unfair dismissal provision where you've got 21 days to make a claim and, or something like that. They can go back 6 years here and make a claim against you if they want to, right? Someone who hasn't worked with you for 3 years can come back and say, those early 3 years I worked for you, even though it's been 3 years since I've been gone, you owe me money. You underpaid me. So keep that in mind. Right. I'm going to talk now about the impact that we saw coming a couple of years ago. And this is impacting the mining industry, the Queensland coal sector predominantly is what I'll talk about right now, because there's a decision made by BHP now. Now, you may recall, if you've been listening to this podcast I think we've been on for a couple of years now, haven't we? If you've been listening all the way back then when closing loopholes was happening and all this sort of stuff, the labour hire same job, same pay legislation was coming out. We were very vocal about this. We said similar. I don't know what exactly I said, but it was along these lines. This is going to impact businesses in a knock-on effect. This is going to drive the cost of operating in companies right up, specifically the mining businesses and construction businesses. And when you hit mining, when mining starts to suffer, that's one of our biggest exports in this country, and people don't understand this. We're sitting here, even I'm sitting here today on the Gold Coast on a waterfront location, looking at beautiful skylines. That is not what our country is. Now, I've been west. I've lived in regional Queensland. I've been on mining sites. I've been in oil and gas operations. I've been on the west coast. I've been in around Karratha. That is where Australia's resources come from. That's where Australia's money comes from. That's where Australia's strength comes from, right? Very few people realise that, and it's back of their mind because they've never been there, they've never seen it, they've never seen what it takes to make this country as strong as it is using our resources and exports. Well, all these changes that have happened, BHP and now they've announced 750 redundancies. That's in Queensland's BMA operations. They've announced that they're going to put low margin operations essentially on hold, just suspend them. And also, there's a site going into care and maintenance. That's South Saraji Mine in Queensland going into care and maintenance. Now, what does care and maintenance mean? Care and maintenance is when, I've been part of this sort of process before. Back in 2012 or whenever it was, there was a couple of years of rolling industrial action, and these unions, CFMU it was back then, CFMU and the ETU, and probably another one I can't remember now. They just were just so stubborn and aggressive and just wanted to fight. They would not agree to anything. They were forcing their members to strike at one site, bust them all to one other location, and protest and all sorts of things. Right, for a couple of years, this happened until finally BMA said, "Well, bugger you guys, we're shutting down a couple of sites, put a couple in care and maintenance." Now, I was part of a team that made about 600 people redundant. Right, it's not a good thing to go through. Right now, we're talking about 750 redundancies. Care and maintenance means that it's going to be too expensive for BMA or BHP to close down a mining operation, because then you have to go into sort of a restorative pattern or restorative work. You've got to recover the land. You've got to regenerate the land. You've got to repair the damage you've done to the land, that sort of thing. That's a very expensive thing to do. So they just leave, skeleton staff there doing care and maintenance work on all the assets, all the equipment, and that sort of stuff, just to make sure they can turn those machines back on with no issues when the coal price goes back up. This is standard practice, right? But that's what's happening now. So they're not shutting mines, but they are putting one into care and maintenance, and they're making 750 redundancies. Now, what does this mean, right? Well, why did this happen is what I should be saying. There are two main reasons. One is publicly commented on, not by BHP. Look, BHP got deep government ties, right? They're not going to directly go to the government and say it's because of your royalties, but it is because of their royalties. That's one major thing. And this is the Queensland Labor government royalties. They're astronomical. Many companies some companies have gone into administration, coal mining companies recently in the last weeks I'm talking about, and they're squarely blaming the Queensland royalties, right? These royalties were set by the Queensland Labor government, and they're in place until 2030. So, I don't think there's going to be much appetite for change there. Even though there's a Liberal government in play right now, they may, who knows? But they also say, also due to market conditions. Market conditions mean a number of things. Market conditions means, the price they'll get for coal. That's one thing. But it means industrial relations as well, right? It means the same job, same pay order that BHP lost, which is now billions of dollars more to run these operations. And that's a legislative change that this government made 3 years ago. And 2 or 3 years ago, when we were reviewing these bills, these acts, the changes to the act that got put through the Senate and approved and all that sort of stuff, we were saying back then, this is going to drive the cost of every business through the roof. It's going to hit mining first, construction first, and then it's going to filter through. Well, this is it. We're here now. And you probably heard us say that it takes a couple of years for this legislation to roll through and for companies to realize what it means before they start really, changing their business or suffering in some way. Here we are, a couple of years later, 750 redundancies. Now, the next step, though, for here, this is the disappointing bit. This industry employs lots and lots and lots of people, directly and indirectly. It also trains lots and lots and lots of people. BHP Billiton invested $300 million into training facilities. What do you think happens now? All that gets switched off, right? That's kids, people who were in training that thought they were going to be stepping into careers. No longer the case. There's no jobs for you. In fact, we're turning the training systems off as well. Training facilities are going to stop now too. Now, that may or may not happen, but that's the next step, right? That's one of the most detrimental things that can happen for the industry. As now, it's when it restarts again, when it gets going again, that pipeline of talent is not there. We already suffer with needing to bring so many people in through immigration just to staff our jobs that we have right now in almost every industry. Agriculture is one of the worst ones. Mining's probably right up there as well, right? But $300 million investment in training centres for what now? They'll turn that off, right? Then after that, you've got community issues. Mostly in regional communities are going to see impacts here because entire supply chains are going to be turned off. But not just that, small businesses are in that supply chain. They're closed. People lose their jobs. They leave those regional towns. Now, you may hear some rhetoric, from the Mining and Energy Union, which is the CFMEU, right? They just split off because the CFMEU is so rotten to the core. They split off, but they are the same union. Let's make no mistake about that. You're going to hear them now throwing as much shit as they possibly can at BHP, right? They're one of the big reasons that market conditions, as they call it, are so poor and abhorrent that even a global giant like BHP Billiton can't see any reason to invest in Australia anymore. Right? They're part of it. They drove these changes. They drove the same job, same pay cases. They drove them, and the ACTU drove the government to make these changes. The changes that the government is now copying themselves. That first point I made with the NDIS scheme, they're now seeing it themselves. They're now feeling the pinch now. They've got to come up with billions more dollars now themselves to pay people because of the decisions they made to influence the Fair Work Commission. Right? This is what we're seeing now. It takes a couple of years, but when it takes hold, geez, you better hold on tight because it really takes hold. When the mining industry starts to shed numbers, shut down mine sites, close down companies, make redundancies, that's the first sign that we're about to have a hard time, right? Pay attention to that. Now, the last point I think I'll make on this is it's associated, right? But we've got to pay attention to what's happening. I look at the banking industry, and this is just a few banks that I've just looked at in the last just this morning before I started doing this podcast. Bank of Queensland last year axed 400 jobs. Late last year, right? 400 jobs. Westpac, they've axed 1,000 jobs. Plus, they're going to axe 1,500 more jobs. CBA, they closed down 45 call centres. ANZ, they're axing 3,500 employees and a further 1,000 contractors. This is information I found in 30 seconds. One industry. That's it. Make no mistake, this is happening absolutely everywhere, right? It's happening absolutely everywhere. We have to pay attention to this. People who run these companies aren't dummies. They're not sticking around in a market that is for fools, that is governed by fools, where decisions are being made that drive the cost of operating right up, and it's costing us our jobs. That's the world we're in. Pay attention. If you're in a smaller business, pay attention to the shedding that these larger companies are doing, because it's going to flow down through supply chains eventually to you. Prepare yourselves. Okay. Now, I'm going to bring this all into preparing yourself, and I'm going to use the Fair Work Commission's president's decision to change the general protections claim process to make it all make sense for you. When I say prepare yourselves as a small or medium-sized business, what do I mean? Well, I don't mean go and sack everybody. I don't mean that, right? If you have to, you have to. This is the reality that we're in today. But if you can't keep one person and then have 10 people lose their jobs because you kept that one, right? That's the reality of small businesses every now and then. If you have to go through that process, you have to. But what I mean is this. Get your time recordings happening, because the courts are not in your favor. Get your contracts right. Offsetting has to be in every one of your contracts, so you can use every pay cycle. to protect yourself. Every pay cycle, you've got an offsetting clause. And you know what? Even if you're paying against the award, I'm going to put in a foolproof or save all clause in your remuneration section of your contract that says, in the event the employer pays anything above an industrial instrument determines needs to be paid, the intention of that is to offset. You know, we'll word that up in the right way, but do that. Get your contracts right, your time recording, that sort of thing, right? You document your procedures, document all sort of stuff, because we've hit a period of time now. And again, this is another thing we warned about 3 years ago, where cases against employers have skyrocketed. Now, I'm going to give you a specific example here, but we've seen this. A couple of weeks ago, we had a general protections claim, one of our clients. We're not going to name the person or the company. Not going to share those details. But to my surprise, a commissioner intervened in this application before conciliation had even happened. That's quite unusual, right? Very unusual. And it piqued my interest. I'm like, well, what's happening here? A commissioner has actually stepped in, reviewed the application, and addressed the applicant and said words to the effect of, you ought to consider cancelling or not proceeding, discontinuing this application. Didn't say those words verbatim, but that was the tone of the email, and that struck me as very unusual, very peculiar. And then, of course, I remembered all the things I've been saying for a couple of years and seeing from the Commission's reporting. Cases have skyrocketed. They've gone through the roof. Increases in everything, right? Increases in every kind of application you can think of, and some even by 50% or even more. As a previous podcast episode we've done where I shared those numbers from a Fair Work Commission report about the increase in claims. It was about 15,000 more claims per year, right? And that's because the government made all these changes. And when they make changes and new laws, you bet your bottom dollar employees and unions and lawyers are going to read every contract line by line and pursue a matter, to the tune we see now of about 15,000 more claims a year than it was 3 years ago. Nonetheless, general protections claims. We had a client that received a general protections claim, and the commissioner specifically intervened and said, you better cancel this one, right? Now, move forward about a week or so, that has been discontinued. Now, what we're seeing here, what we know, that the president of the Fair Work Commission has now come out and said, we've seen just since July last year a further increase of 45% of general protections claims. Now, about 80% of those make it no further than a conciliation, right? The fact is this: I would suggest anecdotally, I mean, they say about 2/3 of these claims, but I'd say probably it's more like a quarter, 3/4 of these claims are not general protections claims at all. What we're seeing here is where an employee doesn't have provisional access to make an unfair dismissal claim, because if they did, there'll be a jurisdictional objection that shuts it down. That means things like they haven't been there for 6 months or 12 months if you're a small business, so they can't make an unfair dismissal claim, or they weren't actually dismissed. There's some other reason or something else happened, or whatever it is, right? It's a couple of these different objections you can have, which essentially stops an unfair dismissal claim in its tracks. These employees who fall within that world are going, oh, well, I'll just do a general protections, it's an unfair dismissal, right? The claim is about an unfair dismissal. I'm going to write my claim saying, well, here's what happened. Here's the situation. I'm going to spell out my unfair dismissal, but I'm going to write it on a general protections claim form. Now, they don't have a general protections claim. The general protections claim means that they've exercised some kind of workplace right that's protected by law, and they suffered adversity because of it. Now, that never happens. Well, rarely it happens, I should say. And, some reporting suggests to the tune of 80% of those claims are false, or at least they've got no merit, or they don't appear to have merit, or they just don't go any further than the commission. Because the commission doesn't hear these matters, right? It goes to the Federal Circuit Court. Why am I telling you this? Well, I'm telling you this because this is why you have to sharpen things up. if all these changes, and we're seeing these big miners, these big banks, all these companies, they're shedding thousands and thousands of people, right? They're shutting down operations. They're closing call centers. They're closing mines. They're doing major shifts in investment, right? That is coming to you. The impact of that is coming to you in your small business. Make no mistake about it. Don't be so foolish you think it isn't. You're part of a supply chain somewhere, and it's going to have a knock-on effect, right? So where you get to a point where it becomes unviable to have so many employees or to target a certain industry or market that might be a pipeline of work for you, and they're impacted, and you need to make cuts yourself. You need to start doing all these things properly, recording your time, your contracts have to be right, your offsetting has to be right. Because if they so choose, the employee so chooses, they're going to put a general protections claim on you. All right. If they can't get access to an unfair dismissal claim, they're going to go general protections claim. It's already happening. In the last year, they're seeing an increase of 45% of claims, 80% of which don't go any further than the commission, which is just immediate conciliation about it, which means they get discontinued or they just don't go anywhere else because they're not real claims, right? But here's the kicker. Just because the claim is not even a viable general protections claim, you still have to go through it. You still have to respond to the applications. You still have to provide evidence. You have to prove, right? Remember, as an employer, it's reverse onus in the Fair Work Commission. The evidence is on your shoulders, not theirs. You have to prove what they're saying is wrong. They can say whatever they want, and they're protected to. It's you that has to prove that what they say is not true. You still have to go through all this, regardless of if they've got merit or not, if the commission so lets it happen. Thankfully, we're starting to see the commission fight back a little bit and say and intervene early, as in our real world scenario, and tell applicants, look, you better discontinue this one. Now, the president's come out and said that they're going to change the process for general protections claims. That just means what they're going to do is make it a more onerous process. So, it just means that there'll be a bit more of a motivation for false claims or people who realize along the way they don't really have a general protections claim. Maybe they'll drop out and drop it off. I guess that's the intention. But what it also means is that we as respondents, as employers, are going to have to provide a lot more detailed information in the upfront early stages of the process as well. More administrative burden for us. Okay? Not good news. It's not good news. They're going to ask for more information, so you better have it to give them. So I'll go back and say again, you better start recording your time. You better start making sure your contracts exist in the first place, have the right clauses in them, tailored, customized to your workplace and your practices, have the right classifications and award coverages and all that sort of stuff understood. You better make sure that's all happening, because now we're a couple of years on, it's starting to bite hard. The most successful organizations in the world are shutting operations and shedding numbers in Australia. Pay attention to this. All right, I might leave that one there. Thank you for joining me. If you haven't done so yet, go to www.hrcartel.com. Join the cartel. Go and check it out. You can be a member. You can have a free membership, which of course you don't get all the nice things that all of our members get. Our paying members get, or our premium members get. You won't get all that stuff, but you will be connected to us. You can ask us questions. You can see when we're doing webinars and training courses and all that sort of stuff. You can be in our world. Go and do that, www.hrcartel.com. You want to book a session? You got an issue in your hands, you want to get some advice, book a session on the website. If you want to just make contact, ask us a question, get to know us more, sign up to our newsletter, whatever. It's all at that website. So go to www.hrcartel.com. And let's get connected. Let's start a nice, warm friendship, shall we? Okay, until next time, keep it tight, workplace. We'll talk soon.